If you're like a lot of other Illinois farmers, you've had some varying weather this year. Some have been dry and still dry. Some have been wet and you're still wet. And fortunately, you're probably not like the folks over in Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, where they've had 17 inches of water. But if you've had excess water, there's probably some concerns you've had. How much has it damaged a corn crop? How much may have it washed out some of the nutrients? And to answer some of those questions, University of Illinois postdoc researcher Dr. Connor Sible has been working on that to kind of figure out how he could answer some of those questions for you. And Connor, you've actually flooded some fields, not like we see on the news, but in a more reasonable way that you've got excess water on a lot of cornfields. How did you go about this to be able to get your answers?
Yes, Stu. So, really excited to talk about this. One of the things I love about being at the university side is sometimes we get to do some crazy things like flood our fields. And agreed, it's not like some of those massive rain events, the 17 inches in the north. When we're talking flooding, think 6 days of saturated soils. So maybe the crop's not totally underwater, but you've got surface ponding, wet soils, but the crop survives. And maybe that early stage, some of the stages around like the corn we've got behind us, V6, V7, where there's still a chance to maybe get equipment across the field. So you've got that standing water, the crop is pale, you can tell it's been damaged, and you kind of have a question, right? Are we calling the insurance adjuster? Or are we calling the local co-op to maybe try and make a rescue management? And that's what we're looking at in this study. So we purposely flooded our fields, right? Anyone that knows myself and my colleague, Dr. Fred Bilo, we love high yields, and here we are flooding fields, taking some yield away. But then we're looking at what do you do after that? Side dress nitrogen is the first thing we're looking at. So should you side dress nitrogen after saturation event, and how much should you put out? Because there's economics and environmental water quality conditions as well. We lost nitrogen and we're putting more nitrogen on, and then how much should we do, and where's the fine balance there? So some exciting work we're doing, second year of this work.
Second year, what did you find out the first year?
Yep, so the first year, as we did find, you can rescue after 6 days of saturated conditions. You can side dress nitrogen and rescue that crop and get some yield back. And it really only took about 40 units of side dress nitrogen. We had 160 up front for reference. So it would be assuming 25% of our nitrogen was lost when we had the saturated conditions. Could we put that back? Key thing last year was dry year. So we didn't have rain after the flooding, and that probably helped us. So it'll be interesting this year. Looks like we got rain in the forecast. After saturation with the side dress and then more rain, does that pay in the end? Those are the questions we're going for, and really excited about this project as well, because I want to give a huge shout out. It takes a team, takes a group to do this. So myself, Dr. Bilo, are running the agronomy side, but we've got fantastic colleagues, Dr. Esther Goomby and Dr. Angela Kent, looking at more the stress side of the plants and the microbes in the soil to better understand what's the plant thinking. What is the plant changing internally in response to that flooding stress? And that might help our breeders down the road develop hybrids that might be stress tolerant or flooding tolerant, right? We have drought tolerant hybrids. Right. Do we have flood tolerant hybrids? That's a question that we may be able to answer down the road.
Okay, so we're getting started. Will you have more flooding as in some of your plots as the summer goes on? Are you going to keep a lot of them just wet all the time?
Yes, so one of the things I think everyone agrees, climate is different than it was, and we're getting these more frequent extreme weather events with then these dry gaps between them. So the way that we've designed this approach, we have one block that we're putting the saturation out and the flooding out there, V3 to V4, V5, so still time to get out there, and then not flooding that again. But we have another block that we will repeat the flooding around V8, V9, in the scenario where we had the water, we side dressed, then we got more water, and was the side dress no longer of value? So understanding that. And the way I think about it with farmers, we always have low spots in our fields. Every farmer knows which areas are prone to repeat saturation events. But I think these extreme weather events we're having, now there's areas in our fields that are holding water that never used to. And we have more acres that are in these saturated conditions than we were used to having to worry about. And then it's what do you do about managing those areas that do get that one-time saturation event, and you can see the plant is stressed, but you know that that's not typical for that area, how should you manage it to bring that yield potential back up?
Okay. If we're keeping the soil wet and in some ponds and things like that, how are you dealing with that as you apply more side dress or whatever you need to do? Seems like you'd be mudding in a lot of opportunity.
Agreed. And so one of the ways that we're timing it is we're saying when it was dry enough that a farmer could put equipment through it again without doing damage is when we'll make that side dress. So after the water turns off, last year it was 7 days. After 7 days, but again, it was a dry year, we were able to actually drive equipment out and make that side dress. But if you continue to get rains, that could delay it. And so we're doing everything as farmer focused as we can. And so I'm going out there and looking at the soil and saying, yep, today I could drive it, so today we'll side dress it. So making sure that it's as real scenarios as we can when we provide those results.
You indicated that at the outset that you're going to look at, do I call the insurance agent?
Mm-hmm.
Are you working with some insurance categories and perspectives as to whether they would approve something or not?
Yep, so we're not quite there yet. And one of the things we're trying to understand as well is what is the yield loss, and is it significant enough to warrant maybe having some of that insurance out there for the flooding side? I mean, we always know about hail insurance on crops, but how much do we consider for these saturation events and the potential there? So I think that's the discussions we'll get down the road. This is some pilot work and some preliminary work, but it seems like this is a more common scenario than it used to be.
Right. And so at the end of the year, you'll harvest the corn, see what happened in each one of them, and then probably you'll publish a report on that.
Exactly, and we will be putting that out. This is a NIFA-funded project with the USDA grant, so everything about this project will be available for anyone to look at, and that's really exciting about it as well. So yeah, we've got the flooding response and then hybrid responses in there too. We've got 2 different hybrids with different backgrounds. Last year we did find one hybrid was flooding tolerant, and the other hybrid was extremely nitrogen responsive. And so it's one of those things, pick the right hybrid for the low spots, and then put a more progressive hybrid or a more racehorse hybrid in areas that you could then manage if you get that rain. So I think there's a lot in the future. You think about variable rate seeding. Maybe we put flood tolerant hybrids out on the low spots, and then more management responsive hybrids in the areas that in an extreme event might be wet but is not typically wet, and really save the yield potential across the field.
Probably have to put an extra couple of seed tanks on that planter.
Yeah, that's the caveat there, right? So as a researcher, it's great I can come up with these questions and ideas, and then the practicality comes into play. But definitely things to consider.
Some great things to consider, and not only for what his research is, but things for you to consider in coming years. So you may put the old gears to work and figure out how you can make and take advantage of what Connor and Dr. Fred Bilo are creating as far as some answers to your questions and challenges. Thanks for watching. I'm Stu Ellis.